The winds howled over the battered coast of Wales as winter crept in. But the cold that spread through England in 1326 was not born of weather. It was born of vengeance. The kingdom trembled under the weight of a crumbling monarchy, and at the blackened heart of it stood a man whose rise to power had been swift, shameless, and soaked in blood. Hugh Despenser the Younger. He was once just a nobleman's son, ambitious and cunning, but in the court of King Edward II, ambition was currency, and Despenser knew how to spend it. In a world ruled by swords and secrets, he offered the king more than loyalty. He offered control, intimacy, flattery. Edward, weak and desperate, made him his closest advisor, his chamberlain, and, many whispered, his lover. Whatever truth lay in that bed of rumors, one thing was clear. Despenser's grip on the king was absolute. From the moment he ascended, the Despenser name became a curse. Nobles who dared oppose him were stripped of land, thrown into dungeons, or worse. Entire families vanished under trumped-up charges. He expanded his power like a creeping rot, confiscating estates, raising taxes, and silencing enemies. Men once loyal to the crown began to murmur rebellion, their oaths cracking under the weight of tyranny. But Despenser didn't fear them. He had the king, and the king had the throne. But what neither of them had was Queen Isabella. She had been Edward's bride since girlhood, a French princess traded for peace. But marriage meant nothing when the king shared his bed and counsel with favorites like Despenser. Isabella watched, with growing fury, as Hugh replaced her in court, in power, in influence. Her sons were raised under the shadow of a man she loathed. She bore it all in silence, until the silence broke. In 1325, under the pretense of a diplomatic mission to France, Isabella left England with her son, the young Edward, heir to the throne, and refused to return. She joined forces with Roger Mortimer, a disgraced nobleman and fugitive who had escaped the Tower of London. Their bond was more than political. In exile, they became lovers. Together, they plotted to bring England back from the abyss. Their plan was simple: overthrow the king, destroy Hugh Despenser. And in the autumn of 1326, they landed in England with a mercenary army. As their banner rose, so did the people's rage. Noble houses that had suffered under Despenser flocked to their side. Edward's support collapsed like a rotted bridge. Cities opened their gates to Isabella. Soldiers defected. The country wanted blood. Edward and Despenser fled west, dragging the crown toward Wales. But there was no safety in the hills. Cornered and hunted, the king's last loyalists melted away. It was over. On a windswept November day, Hugh Despenser the Younger, the most hated man in England, was captured near Yantrisant, half-starved, in disguise, and trembling. They didn't kill him right away. That would have been too merciful. He was dragged in chains through the mud-soaked roads to Hereford, where Queen Isabella waited in her dark velvet robes. The people spat at him as he passed, threw dung and rotten meat. To them, he wasn't a man. He was a parasite, a symbol of royal corruption, a devil in silks. They dressed him in a torn surcoat emblazoned with the royal arms, a final mockery of the crown he once controlled. His face, once powdered and proud, was now sunken and pale, but his eyes still burned with something, not defiance, but disbelief, as if he couldn't comprehend that the world had turned against him. The trial was no trial at all. It was a ceremony of humiliation, read aloud before a cheering crowd. The charges were long: theft, treason, corruption, sodomy, heresy. but in truth, his greatest crime was being hated. The sentence had already been written. The method of his death would not be swift. It would be remembered. On November the 24th, 1326, the town square of Hereford filled with thousands. The air was thick with the iron scent of winter and anticipation. A gallows had been built, but it was not for hanging. It was the stage for a public dissection of power. A hanging, drawing, and quartering was rare, reserved only for the worst traitors. And Despenser was to be the centerpiece. They stripped him naked and tied him to a wooden hurdle, dragging him behind horses through the filth of the streets. A punishment meant to grind away dignity before the blade even touched skin. His flesh scraped across cobblestones. Blood mingled with mud. He didn't scream. Not yet. When he reached the scaffold, they hoisted him up, hung him by the neck, but not to kill. Just enough to strangle, just enough to choke. As he gasped and twitched, the rope was cut, and he collapsed into the arms of executioners. He was still alive, and the true horror was just beginning. First came the castration. The crowd surged forward as Despenser was pinned down. His legs kicked weakly as the executioner unsheathed his knife. Without ceremony, without words, he sliced off Despenser's genitals, a punishment for the sodomy he had been accused of, whether real or fabricated. The flesh was burned before his eyes, smoke rising into the gray sky. He howled, he begged. His cries echoed across the fields like the death wail of a kingdom. Then came the evisceration. With precise cruelty, they opened his abdomen, pulling out loops of intestine while he still breathed. The blood steamed on the cold boards. A priest murmured last rites, but the words were drowned by the crowd, chanting, laughing, howling for more. His eyes fluttered, body convulsing as the executioner reached inside his chest and ripped out his heart, still faintly beating, a symbol of his loyalty, or lack thereof. Finally, they beheaded him and quartered the corpse. The 4 limbs were sent to 4 corners of the kingdom, York, Bristol, Dover, and Newcastle, as a warning. His head was impaled on London Bridge, grinning over the Thames like a demon sent back to hell. The Queen watched it all without flinching. Isabella, triumphant, stood amid the carnage in quiet satisfaction. She had destroyed the man who once ruled her husband. She had taken back England. But the cost of vengeance is rarely paid in a single life. In time, the people who cheered for Hugh's death would cheer again, when Isabella and Mortimer were overthrown by her own son, Edward III. In the end, justice in medieval England was not blind. It was theatrical. It wasn't about guilt. It was about power. And power, when threatened, turned savage. So ask yourself this: was Hugh Despenser a monster who got what he deserved? Or a man consumed by a throne too corrupt to touch without being destroyed? Either way, his screams are still buried in the soil of Hereford, and the iron crown he wore was forged not of gold, but pain.